So many questions arrived during your presentation, and we'll try to answer to some of the questions, or at least main of the main topics. But I would like to remind people that you still can post questions on the website during the discussion. So to start, I suggest to take the first question, please. Okay, do mycotoxin in raw material induce oxidative stress? I may ask maybe Peter to start to answer on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I've been working on this subject for a number of years and publishing a few papers and reviews, and the major conclusion is that at the molecular level, most of mycotoxins impose oxidative stress. We can talk about T2 toxin, which mainly impose oxidative stress in the gut, and damaging gut actually will cost a lot of poultry and pig producers. We are talking about DON, we are talking about ochratoxin, aflatoxin, fumonizins. So generally speaking, most of mycotoxins actually impose oxidative stress. Most of mycotoxins are immunosuppressive because this oxidative stress, as I mentioned before, can damage those communicating devices. And most of mycotoxins impose apoptosis, which is a programmed cell death. Therefore, from the point of view of nutritionists, to deal with mycotoxins is very important, but it's very difficult questions because there is no magic bullet. There is no full solution for this problem in animal industry because on the market there are plenty of various solutions, including various adsorbents, but we need to be realistic. There is no an adsorbent which can absorb 100% of those mycotoxins. Therefore, part of them, maybe 30% or 40%, can escape those binding, and they will go to the liver, where they will be detoxified, and during the detoxification process, the liver can be damaged. Therefore, antioxidant supplementation, antioxidant strategy is a key to deal with those mycotoxins. On the other side, DON is mainly metabolized in the gut. Again, we need to maintain that balance between antioxidants and pro-oxidants in the gut to make sure that detoxification of the DON is going well. Therefore, from the point of view of nutritionists, we need to have in place a good antioxidant strategy to deal with those mycotoxins which are actually immunosuppressive, which are damaging gut, which are damaging liver, and which actually decrease productive and reproductive performance.
Thank you, Peter. You want to add some comments, Mario?
Well, actually, Peter is the true expert in this field, but of course I can add something because, in fact, as I said before, it is not possible to have a good meat quality without having a good feed quality. So mycotoxins is one of those factors that have to be controlled because, in fact, they have an impact on the animal and also an impact on the final product. So in a way, decisions that we make at the farm has consequences on the final products, and this is something that we have to take into consideration. The feeds should be of high quality, and of course the presence of mycotoxins is something that we should avoid as much as possible.
Thank you, Mario. Another question coming from the web. That's maybe related to what we said before. Is oxidized fat in the diet a source of oxidative stress? And I think it's quite interesting because we talk about the stress at the gut level, but how can you link that oxidized fat and oxidative stress?
There is definitely a linkage in here, yes. In fact, because not only for animals, also for human beings, it is proven that whenever we intake oxidized lipids and oxidized proteins, right after that, there is an increase in the level of some lipid and protein oxidation markers in the blood and urine and some other tissues. So it is very clear that some lipid and protein oxidation products, some oxidized amino acids, and then some low molecular lipid oxidation products, they are present in the food, and then of course after intake they will be in contact with the intestinal mucosa, and actually they are having some activity in there, and actually Peter can actually talk about that because in a way affect the gut health not only in animals, but also in human beings. And then after that, there is an intestinal uptake. So they are absorbed, and then they go through the bloodstream, and they are distributed to different organs. And so obviously there is a direct impact of what we can call dietary oxidative stress and then oxidative stress, because what is basically an increase of oxidation products in our blood, in our tissues, and then they will have some negative consequences. So definitely returning to the idea that feeds should be controlled in terms of quality, we should avoid using feeds with high oxidation levels. And that also takes me to the idea that polyunsaturated fatty acids are also dangerous in feeds because they are very sensitive to oxidation. It is more likely to have high oxidation rates when we are having feeds enriched in polyunsaturated fatty acids, unless we include, of course, some antioxidants naturally. But
thank you, Mario. Maybe Peter, you can add some comments on that, and particularly at the gut level. I think
at the gut level, as I mentioned already, there is this delicate balance between antioxidants and pro-oxidants, and oxidized fat, which is coming from the diet, is a major contributor to the pro-oxidant part. And we need to realize that the quality of the fat in the diet is related to the price of the diet. So sometimes producers are looking for cheap fat, and if this cheap fat is oxidized, there could be consequences. We can look, for example, on the breeder side, because what happens as part of the oxidized fat can be transferred into the egg, and then during embryonic development it's imposing additional oxidative stress, which will be related to increased mortality during embryonic development and postnatal development. And we know today that the maternal nutrition is a key actually for the productive and reproductive performance of progeny. So on this side, at the side of epigenetics, we now can say that it's very dangerous to play with oxidized fat, at least in the breeder diet. We know that oxidized fat can have negative consequences for broilers and for other animals, but when we're talking about breeding animals, it could be sow, or it could be a chicken breeder or poultry breeder, then at this side, we need to avoid as much as possible those oxidized fat, which are cheap, but cheap does not mean effective. Therefore, from this point of view, supplementation with antioxidants, the antioxidant system maintenance is a key issue to actually prevent those damages which oxidized fat can actually impose.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe another question from the web? You said free radicals are used as weapons against bacteria, play a role of messenger. What about too high antioxidant intake? So we are really dealing with a balance. Huh?
Yeah, we are talking about balance, and actually too much of good seed could be bad seed. And because generally speaking, if we look at the immune system, this very, very delicate balance is responsible not only for production of free radicals, which is under the control of the cell, but the signaling processes are very important to maintain that protection to the to the maximum efficiency. And therefore, too much, there is not much actually evidence, but there are some publications say that overdose of vitamin E probably can affect immune systems. That could be one example, that too much of good thing can be bad. If we look at the selenium side, we know that high dose of selenium can, especially in the form of selenite, can impose oxidative stress, and this will be also bad. And in general terms, when we look at the diet in general, we have plenty of various antioxidant compounds, and we need to make sure that we have that optimal balance I'm talking about. I mentioned in my figures that, for example, flavonoids are considered as antioxidant police, and there are plenty of publications actually claiming that flavonoids are very good antioxidants. However, if you look more closely what is done with them, they are very good antioxidants in the tube. They are very good antioxidants in vitro. They might do a good job with meat quality when you add them directly into the meat. However, they are not well absorbed. Therefore, they can do probably a good job in the gut, but beyond the gut, it's not the direct antioxidant effect. Yes, they probably can affect transcription factors and be involved in other mechanisms of maintaining an antioxidant system. But we cannot say today that flavonoids in the liver have have direct, for example, in the liver, have direct antioxidant effects. Therefore, for the nutritionist, it's a difficult job to find that a proper balance which gives the best results in terms of stability of antioxidant in the feed, stability antioxidants and their absorption in the gut, and the delivery of those antioxidants to target tissue when they can have that effect. And therefore, to finalize this answer to that question, yes, too much of good thing could be bad. Therefore, the balance is a key.
So our job as nutritionists is more difficult. In fact, you have to balance, but we have also to deal before the absorption and after the absorption when we look at the meat aspects. So
well, in fact, I think that the question is actually very pertinent and very clever. And the situation is very complex, particularly with flavonoids, with these phenolic compounds, what they are usually called natural antioxidants. And here we also have this connection between animal nutrition and human nutrition as well, because some of these compounds, some vitamins like vitamin E, vitamin A, and vitamin C, as well as flavonoids, they are sometimes used as nutritional supplements. And there are actually many studies carried out by accredited and really famous and recognized experts in the field, stating that actually they are not as good as they appear. Let's say that probably we shouldn't call them antioxidants. At least they are not antioxidants always. So we probably should refer as redox active compounds. And sometimes they act as antioxidants depending on the concentration, the dose, and also the circumstances. And sometimes they act as prooxidants. And something that is making everything even more complicated is that sometimes the prooxidant actions of some of those phenolic compounds can actually be positive in a way that whenever this prooxidant is in the body, is sending some kind of message to the tissue, so that okay, now we have to synthesize more endogenous antioxidant defenses. So a little dose of prooxidant redox compound sometimes is good, so that to maintain and to keep a good antioxidant status in the body. So everything is very complicated, and for phenolic compounds, it is really, really complicated. I think that we have ahead a lot of studies that we have to carry out to understand the biological effects of these compounds.
So thank you. So it's really important to look at the complexity, but also try to clarify.
My last remark to this one could be, sorry to interrupting you, that absolutely, Mario is absolutely right, that flavonoids actually affect transcription factors, being prooxidants.
Yeah.
So their effect on actually antioxidant system, not due to antioxidant property, but more prooxidant properties. That's a complicated thing, but we know that they are still important part of the animal nutrition.
Thank you. Maybe we have another question. What is the difference between meat maturation and meat conservation? Are oxidative mechanisms involved in both issues? And that's quite something very, very interesting. You talked about before meat aging, meat maturation, so we are confounded.
Yeah, well, there are several concepts, and sometimes they are mistaken. Meat maturation, or what we usually say meat aging, is the period of time that goes from the slaughter to the point in which we consider meat as such, so something that we can eat or we can use as a raw material for producing some other muscle foods. And then, of course, after slaughter, the meat is something that we need to preserve because it's very easily spoiled by microorganisms. So, in a way that for trying to find the connection between the meat maturation and meat conservation, in a way that during that period of time of meat maturation, we really need to apply some kind of a strategy to keep the meat in good conditions. That means that we need to control microbial growth. That's the first issue. And then, of course, we should also control oxidation.
Yeah, we need to preserve oxidation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this aging is actually a very critical period of time. Sometimes it's overlooked, but it's actually critical, particularly for red meat, because during that period of time, there are a set of biochemical changes, including, for instance, the proteolysis carried out by some endogenous protease that present in the meat. And that is actually making the meat more and more tender. For instance, this is called the tenderization process of meat, which is actually, we have to do anything. It's just to let the meat age, which is this aging idea, and then the meat will be more tender and so on. But of course that the color is a different issue, which is actually directly connected to oxidation, to myoglobin oxidation. So it's a very critical period in which we have set of biochemical reactions. Some of them, the consequences, some of them are very good, like the tenderization. Some of them, like the oxidation of the myoglobin, is not so good because it's turning oxymyoglobin, which is responsible for the red bright color of fresh meat, into the metamyoglobin, which is responsible for the brown color of meat that has been aged, so maturated for a long time. So it's a very interesting question, but maybe also very complex, very complex to cover.
Thank you, Mario. Maybe another question from the web. Oxidative impairs male's fertility. What about female? That's an often question. You show the spermatozoid defects and so on, but what happens at the female level?
Yeah, if we look at the female level, let's take the chicken first. So we can have a look at the egg. We put the egg into the hatchery, and during 21 days we will have a chicken. So what's happened? First of all, egg yolk contain pretty high proportion of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and those fatty acids can be oxidized. And more importantly, during embryonic development, embryo synthesizing polyunsaturated fatty acids, and the level of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the newly hatched chicken is most doubled in comparison to the egg. So we're talking about more than 50% of total fatty acid in the newly hatched chick liver are unsaturated. Therefore, they are very sensitive to oxidation. We know that hatching process itself is an oxidative stress because we have high temperature. At the time of peeping, we have oxygen coming in, we have high humidity, so this imposes oxidative stress, and therefore the antioxidant defense of the egg yolk could be a key to get a viable chick. That's the one side. If we look at the female side from the sow, for example, yes, sow also is under the stress, in stress conditions, and the piglet birth is also stress, and again, high proportion of polyunsaturated fatty acid in newly born piglet impose oxidative stress, and they are very sensitive, and therefore what they get antioxidants from colostrum and milk, and this is the most critical part of the development of the piglet, to get as much as possible antioxidants through colostrum and milk. However, there are some restrictions on that one. Restriction in terms that placenta is not good for transferring them. Therefore, for nutritionists, it's a bit of headache how to deal with it, how to provide optimal antioxidant defenses for newly born piglet, for newly born chicken, or any other animals.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Maybe we have a last question regarding the main stresses faced by young animals. You talk about the chicks, you talk about the piglets.
Yeah.
Do we consider that the birth and the hatching is maybe one of the critical issue?
Yeah, actually, when you talk about production, commercial animal production or commercial poultry production, the stresses, if we look at the poultry production, stresses started from placement egg into hatchery, during incubation period, the hatching process is stress. Then we have transport, or we have holding time after hatching. Chicks are in boxes waiting to be delivered to the poultry house. That's another stress. Then during transportation, especially if we're talking about breeder chicks, which can travel 1 or 2 days maybe by plane between different countries, this is another stress. Then the placement itself in the poultry house with high temperature, with high humidity, and with changing of the feed, because you know that during embryonic development, last week of embryo development, chicken actually consume exclusively protein and lipids. And when they face the feed in the poultry house, it's mainly carbohydrates. So there are a lot of changes which are stressful. Then we have vaccinations. Vaccinations are also impose stress. Then we mentioned already mycotoxins. We can talk about other stresses like transferring birds from rearing houses to breeder houses. Then coming to the pig production. It's also very high stress, because when we're talking about layers which can come 97, 98 of leg A percentage. It's a very high stress for the liver because the most compounds of the egg is synthesized in the liver. Therefore, as you see, the whole process is a stress, stress, stress. If we look at the pig side, it's still the same because at time of farrowing, it's a very high stress for sow. Then we have weaning time. So the weaning is the biggest stress for the piglet. Again, changing from the milk into the dry feed, which is this transition period is very difficult. In many cases, the feed consumption goes down and piglet can actually lose some weight. Then after that one, we get still having some vaccination, change in feed. It's also stress. So to actually summarize, there are plenty of those stresses in animal production. We cannot avoid them. We do our best to decrease those stresses, but the nutritional strategy, it's a key. The nutritional strategy is a key because the most of antioxidants, important antioxidants, are coming with the feed, and if we have that optimal balance, it will give us the highest productive and reproductive performance and high economical return.
Thank you, Peter. So more and more questions have been posted on the web, so we will not address all the questions, unfortunately, but you will get the answers in the days and following weeks. And bye-bye, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you in December.